Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of the CEOMasterMind.Ai Podcast. As you all know, this is we're all about having a conversation here where we bring actionable insight so that you can grow your business, elevate your leadership, and also your own personal health as well. Today, I'm super thrilled to have Alexys Bartok here. She's the visionary behind a brand called Process to Profit. She is also the author of a newly released book called The Perfect Org Chart. We're going to dig into a little bit about that today as well. I think what's unique about Alexys is she obviously has, and you'll see through the conversation and as you get into her book, we'll put all this stuff in the show notes, but she's got a really game-changing approach to how to build businesses sustainably without, burning out and chaos. And as you know, that's what we're all about here at CEO Mastermind with our management in West. Our philosophy is deeply aligned with get into a business that you love and that you don't hate. And that is all too common, whether you are a founder or whether you're an executive in a Fortune 1000. I've been in all of those situations and there's a lot of commonality. So I'll talk a little bit about her book at a high level and then I'll let Alexys come in. But in her book, she sort of introduces a whole bunch of concepts. Transformative concept like stabilizing before scaling, get that in your head. The 3D model of doers, delegators, and decision makers. I also have a 3D model that I learned from my time in the P&G Clorox world. We won't get into that. And she also talks about something unique, what's called the ROLI, which is the return on labor investment. And that's really something that every leader should know. And I think sometimes people intuitively know it, but they don't really measure it, or they're like, oh yeah, that's so obvious when you hear it, but like you don't really do it. So it's really important to bring that out. And she really does offer in her book a roadmap to really kind of break free from the traditional business trap, so that you can kind of have a little bit of everything. It is possible with system. I think I talked about this on my last podcast, but we all know about 85 to 95 businesses that fail.
Yeah.
The ones that don't fail as much are franchises. So the rate of a franchise business failure is about 10 to 15%. And I say this with love and respect, but oftentimes that comes down to operator error and, operators making bad decisions or going outside the model of the system. So if you don't have systems and systemization, your likelihood to fail is 95%. And we're not going to go through all the stats. You can Google them, 95%, hands down. If you have a system, and if we specifically look at franchise systems, they fail 10 to 15%. So like you have a 95% chance of success rather than failure. So which one would you rather take? I think the answer is pretty obvious. So at the end of the day, if you're a founder executive navigating, this is something you got to listen to. Alexys, super excited to have you here. Yeah, we're supposed to get together in person, and unfortunately for the listeners here, we're recording this in January 2025, but there was a devastating hurricane in Asheville, North Carolina. We're going to do a 2-day workshop and super excited. And, luckily Alexys is okay, but we did miss that chance to spend some more in-person time. So, but welcome, and I appreciate you making time today.
Yes, thanks so much for having me. And don't worry, we will make it up this year. So we'll hang out again.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah,
for
all right.
sure.
So I'm prepping for this call, kind of going through your stuff and reading. I was like, I came up with like 10 questions, which, by the way, audience, don't worry, we're not going to go through them all. It will be mission impossible. We're going to target 30, 40 minutes here, but, just to highlight, and then we'll dig into a one or two, maybe, Alexys will hit a little bit of each. We'll see how this goes. But I'm really talking about scaling foundations, team optimization, overcoming founder dependency, the labor efficiency model about ROLI, which I talked about earlier, the scalar role. Something that's really big right now across the globe is navigating economic uncertainty. That's a topic you touch on. Breaking the more business trap, right? More, rather than systemization. Also, the perfect org chart, which is your book. We can talk about that. I mentioned in the opening about scaling without sacrifice, and then last but not least, personal development through scaling and what all those topics mean. Obviously, we won't be able to get into all of these, but we did want to just really highlight that Alexys's body of work is awesome. That's why we committed with my team to go there and spend a couple of days to really get deep with this. And so we're going to give you a little bit of the tip of the iceberg tip. is basically what we're going to
Yeah.
try to accomplish there.
Perfect.
Yeah, so I'll turn it over to you, and I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about scaling foundations, which you talk about in
Yeah.
your book, and we'll just kind of we'll just have a conversation around it and share experiences and.
Yeah. So I think the best way, and thank you so much for that amazing introduction. Just an honor to be here. When we're talking through like scaling foundations, I often talk about there's really five core keys to any scalable business. And of course, we're specifically talking on operations here, but really a lot of people don't understand what operations actually is. And so oftentimes people are like, well, yeah, I've got my operations in place. But if you Google what is business operations, it literally just says like everything that's required to run a business, which gives us absolutely no clarity at all because that
Mm,
is overwhelming to even think about, right? So, first things first, I would just want to kind of clarify what the point of operations is and what it and overall what it is. So, I like to say that operations is the skeleton of the business. It exists in every piece of the company. So it's in marketing, it's in sales, it's in fulfillment. Oftentimes we say marketing and sales is the blood of the company. If you're thinking of this as a human being or any type of being, it's the blood of the
yep.
company. Whereas if you don't have operations, if you don't have systems and team, then really you just have a limp blood bag, and that's great, but there's not much you can do with it. Once you get the skeleton in, it's actually able to grow. And I like to think of it as really you are, as you're putting this stuff in place, eventually you're able to go from a crawling being to a toddler meandering around to being able to be a fully functioning running enterprise, or like you said, franchise. So I like to say that exactly that operations exists everywhere in the business. And the simplest way to think about it is systems and team. There's obviously a little bit more nuance to that, but there's going to be marketing ops, sales ops, CS, fulfillment ops, etc. So that's the
Mhm.
first piece. The next piece to it is I like to say that there's really the five keys or the five machines, sometimes we call it, to building a profitable engine, a profitable business. And that's going to be your systems, your team, your finance, your lifestyle and balance, and then your growth, which is really your actual scalability. So it sounds like we're probably going to dive in pretty deep on the team element because that's what the book, The Perfect Org Chart, is specifically about. But there are five pieces to this, and it's not just get your team settled and now you've got an amazing business. You've got to get your systems in place, make sure you've got your finances, even having a scalable offer, all of the things. And the one that no one really ever talks about is the lifestyle piece, because oftentimes we're
Mm.
willing to do whatever. When we're founders, we get almost obsessed, almost addicted to the dopamine of running a company. And if we can set it up in a way where actually we become the least important part of the business, that's when the business can scale.
100%. Just to add a little bit to that, that's why we so aligned, as you know, is at CEO Mastermind, and my philosophy has been for the last 25 years is strategy, structure, people. Strategy is where are
Perfect.
we going? Structure is how the heck are we getting there? Who does what? How we're doing it? And all about the systems. You're absolutely right. And then the piece that often that people miss is people. And the way you need to think is in that order: strategy, structure, people. The way you need to behave is in reverse. The problem is most founders and executives, oh yeah, strategy, I got it. And they ignore that, and they through the hustle culture kind of pound themselves right through the operational side of things. And this is why I think we have an epidemic across the Western world and even other parts, based across the world, where people are unhappy. They're
Yeah.
doing things that are inefficient, grinding them down. The founders are grinding down while I'm grinding, so therefore you should grind. And there really is a better way. And I really love, you're right, because there is really, people think operations is just fulfillment, but there's really like operations is the underpinning of everything. Like there's an operational S&OP, standard operating process, playbook, whatever you want to call it. To how do you get put together a strategy? A strategy
Yeah.
in and of itself isn't a operational thing, but the way you do it, how you organize it, how you set it up, like that's called operations. There's a system, there's a systematic, disciplined approach by which you attack those elements, all those multi elements of the business. So I totally agree, and I love the skeleton analogy because it's everyone focused on sales and marketing, and then when they realize you can only drag a blood bag so long before it breaks,
Yeah.
and that's something that we see, right? But unfortunately, and it's just the mission that you and I are on to try to solve throughout the world, right? So
100%.
what do you think are the first steps that founders need to take to kind of go from this firefighting? I remember a post you did, I think it was about 3 years ago when we first connected. A business owner talks about a dumpster fire, and most people run like hell or quit or do whatever. And you're like, no, that lights me up. I mean, that means I can go fix that. And I so vividly remember that. So
Mm.
if someone is into firefighting, into dumpster fire, what are some steps you think they can take towards, or what you've seen worked, or what mistakes people have made as they try to get to the scalable? And also, maybe we should spend a second. What does scalable mean, right? Like, I think some people confuse growth and scalable.
Yeah.
Scalable is when your revenue exceeds faster than your cost structure, and the leverage, right? So if someone thinks of a lever, you can get, if the lever is long enough, I don't know who said it, a philosopher, if I have a long enough lever, I could lift the world. And that's true, because
Mm.
if the lever is long enough and the lever is the system, anything is possible, right? And so it's really thinking about, how do I create more leverage so that you can get a scalable business that's robust through systems and stuff. I think people confuse scalable with growth, and they're totally, I know I did earlier on, and they're two different things. You can grow, but it could be absolute chaos, not scalable, and you hit a ceiling, which almost many businesses and many founders do.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point that I actually don't almost ever see talked about is like, what does scalable even actually mean? And I love that quote you just said about the lever. Like that's beautiful. And such a good point. I think to me, scalability is honestly sustainability, consistency, and bandwidth, but especially leverage, like you said, that leverage and bandwidth, because at what point and this, most of our highest tier clients come in because they have just grown brute force. They have honestly just not even they care but not cared about what they had to do to get there and made sure, they put all the money into the ads. They put the hours in. Like it doesn't matter what they had to do. And we've had companies come into us that are founders end up hospitalized, executives end up hospitalized because they're so stressed and tired
Yeah.
and exhausted, but their business is doing 8 figures. We had a client who their business hit 8 figures within 14 months of launching. That's amazing.
Oh,
Like,
that's unreal.
I wasn't a part of that at all. That's incredible. They joined us on month 15 because they were like, it's bad. Like, it's not good. It's great. It
No.
looks amazing, but it's like so painful to be in. And so I think, we could create a real definition of scalability, but part of it to me is even a feeling of like,
Yeah.
there's so many litmus tests you can do of like, could you or anyone on your team step away a week, 2 weeks, 30 days? And could the business continue to grow or maintain? Like you said, it's not always growth. Sometimes it's maintenance. So
Right.
I think a lot of companies do confuse them, and especially around people don't really think about profits most of the time. They think about revenue, right? So that company might have hit 8 figures in revenue, but they definitely were not hitting healthy metrics in terms of profits. And so that changes a lot
Yeah.
when we get into the nitty-gritty of like, well, what are we really trying to grow? What are we trying to scale?
Yeah, and I liken systems to like biology. So talking to you earlier before we started the show, a friend of mine, Connor Carrick, NHL hockey player, had a podcast, but he's obviously playing a little hard to do these things. Um, he said something that resonated with me because I'm guilty of this and have been. But he said you cannot outmind bad biology. What he meant by
Mm.
that is you can have the world's greatest mindset, but you can't outmind bad food, not exercising. There are certain things we need to do for our bodies to stay healthy and strong. And I liken that to businesses. I mean, there's another example you just mentioned I didn't know about. Someone through brute force, luck, great offer, all the things. A lot of things went right to get to 8 revenue. Then all of a sudden, you look up and a year and a quarter later, and it's just, there's a disaster path in the way. And so they tried to outmine bad biology. Biology always wins. System always win. The right system, like this is, I came from the Fortune 500 world. Like this is why you get to 9, 10, 11, 12 figures. Like there's systems. Like it's not, sure, there's a bit of chaos. There's a different type of chaos at that level, and we're not going to get into there. But in the sort of small, medium enterprise world, as defined by Forbes, is businesses, low 9 figures and below. Yeah, you need systems. Like that is the only thing. And I like what you said about feeling in this sense of like stabilization. Like I've been fortunate to implement systems and be able to go on family vacations for 2 weeks and come back, and we had a recall and I didn't even know about it till I got back. The team had handled it. We had
Yeah.
stuff documented. I was like, perfect. Like this is what it's, and it's an ongoing process, by the way. It's not a set it and
It
forget it.
is. Yeah, I mean, to go back to the question you even asked of like, okay, if someone feels like they're in a dumpster fire, they're like constantly firefighting, like what's even the first thing to do? And one of the most important pieces is to look up and realize that's where you're at. And that's okay. Like, I think oftentimes
Self-awareness.
as entrepreneurs, we're really hard on ourselves because we're constantly moving the goalpost. We're always like, yep, what's next? What's next? What's next? And operations, I say, is the most vulnerable part of the business. It's, let me see everything that is not going well. It's not the Stripe notifications and everything happy. It's team quitting. It's you having to fire team. It's systems failing. And there's also a
Yeah,
lot of beautiful pieces to it, but no one likes to talk about the hard days of being an entrepreneur. And so I
true.
always like to start off with like, hey, your first step is to look up and be like, this is not actually where I want to be. This is not actually the experience I want, and reconnect to what you actually want. Because we can scale any business. I'm sure you and I both have scaled a ton of different types of businesses, but it's
Mhm.
like, what do you want as the founder? And where do you want to take your mission and your vision with it? And like, we have a client right now that is just killing it in marketing and sales. Like, launches are going insane, the systems are there. And she's like, but for the next 6 months, I want to work 20 hours a week. And I'm like, okay, do we want to bring on more team and make it through that? Or do you want to just pull back and update your offer so that way it's less of your time? She goes, yeah, I just want to update the offer. I don't want to bring on team right now. And there's a
Right.
level of incredibleness there, I would say. I don't know if that's a word, but
Right. Yeah, and maturity too, right? This, yeah,
maturity of a
yeah.
being able to say like, I don't have to hit a record revenue month next month. I want to prioritize this or this. Now, can we have it all? Yes, of course. And we can talk through next steps once you have that self-awareness, but also being okay with not always just doing amazing records and like you said, stabilizing. Stabilizing might not be the sexiest word, but it feels really good when it's done.
But basically, the concept is, Pepsi and a lot of Fortune 500, they design something for what they're going after. They find a need, and it doesn't always need to be some blockbuster. Because sometimes people say, "Oh, I need a seven-figure business." Meanwhile, they're losing or making $30,000 net a year. You didn't even buy yourself a job.
Yeah.
So I think it's true. People need to start reverse back to say, okay, you're exactly right. What life do I want to lead? Okay, well, I want to work 20 hours a week because you're too young or don't want to retire. Like for myself, I don't want to retire. I just want to work less hours, but I love
Yeah.
business. And then say, okay, well, how much do I need? Okay, well, I need, $10,000. I need $12,000, making total fake numbers. I need $12,000 a year. So I need to make $1,000 a month to live where I want to live because I'm going to live on some beach in Thailand, make it up. And so you start reverse engineering and say, okay, what system do I have to put in place and what offer? So I think what you said, I think the audience should pay attention to is like, well, what do you want? Because like society or whatever says, oh, you got to be this grind, you have to be this hustle, you're unsuccessful if you're not working 90 hours a week and sleeping on the factory floor like Elon Musk. I'm like, you're not Elon Musk. There's only one. So if you want to be Elon Musk, that's fine, but then don't complain about it. I think what people want is they want what they think Elon has or people like him, but then they're not willing to do the work. And then you're automatically incongruent because that's not for you. So, spiritually speaking, you sort of, well, what is for you? Is it 250 a year? Is it a million a year? And what does that mean? I think people should look at it, what is in their business pocket, and then compare that with the impact. If you want to make a big impact, but you're going to need a big business. So that
Yep.
that means it's going to require more brain time until you can sell it and exit. But even those success stories still take 5, 7 years. Like it takes time. Or you can have a lifestyle business, right? The 200,000, 300,000 a year. That you can enjoy and travel. Like there's all sorts of things you can do. So I think your point. I think the self awareness is really critical, and
Yeah.
building systems to reverse engineer into that, which is what you were talking about. Hey, how do you each what you want? We can do it these two ways. Which one do you want? You provided that answer. So I thought that was a really good example to illustrate is don't get fixated what the world says, fixated on what do you want? Like what do you want personally? What kind of impact you want to make? And then try to find that Venn diagram of okay, where does it all line up that you're, fulfilled and happy most of the time. Right.
Yeah. 100%.
Makes sense. In terms of I talked a little bit earlier. I love the 3D model that you talk about: doers, delegators, and decision making. And the Clorox, and I actually think it's a Coca-Cola concept, because the former CEO came from Coca-Cola. So I don't know where it came from. It's called the 3D model: desire, decide, and delight. So desire
Hmm.
is what you create as your marketing. Like, what are you doing to create desire? Decide is at the moment of truth, when the consumer decides, whether it's at a shelf or on a landing page, what happened there, right? And then the third piece is delight. They bought something, a product or service, with a set of expectation, but then you have to always focus on delighting, because if you delight, you will always come back for more. And
Love
so
that.
you talk positively about the brand. So I have a 3D model. So I wanted that to be one of the questions around team optimization. I'm like, great, because I love the 3D model. I have a 3C model. Like, I break everything into models, and it's the only way my brain works.
The way to do
I'm
it.
like,
Yep.
yeah, and I'm probably like a typical founder with 78 things in my head, typical type A executive, like 78 things in my head, and my head is, 4 pages ahead of my mouth, and my mouth goes fast. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because that really resonated with me, and I won't do the service that you would in explaining it.
Yeah, of
So I
course.
gave you my 3D model, but I love your doers, delegators, and decision makers. Can you talk about that and how to optimize roles for that?
Yeah, of course. So the ideology is really that there's three levels of team. So we call them behind the scenes, like you wouldn't tell someone they're a D1, D2, or D3. But we
Right.
categorize team members by D1, which is going to be a decision maker, D2, which is going to be a delegator, which is really like a manager, and then D3, which is a doer. And this is really important because oftentimes we hire people and we have no real understanding of their role other than we were told we should hire them most of the time, especially if you're in some
Right.
type of coaching or mentorship or anything else. They're like, oh, yeah, just hire an operations manager. Well, what does an operations manager do? Right. So you want to get really clear, especially when you're hiring, but also, let's say we come in, you already have a big team. I'll use the example of the client that I already mentioned, right? That they did amazing things and we came in and they had a huge team. Like they had like 65 people on their team. And there's a lot to it because they hadn't categorized what each team member's role was. What were they supposed to be? A decision maker, which is really like a director, head of a department. That's somebody that could make a decision on the founder's behalf for their department, or they could come up to the founder and be like, hey, I want to do this. I just want to make sure you're okay with it if they're a little bit more new. But a D1 decision maker, they're going to set the KPIs. They're going to set the plan. They're going to say, we need to hire or change out the team that I have in my department most of the time, depending on the level of the business, but usually the founder is the only D1, or they are paying someone as a D1, but they actually are a D2. So the D2
Right.
is going to be that delegator, that manager who couldn't really make the decisions on your behalf, but can definitely manage any systems you've already laid out, can definitely manage any of the doers, and really report up. So they're fantastic, and D2 can become D1. It's just if you're willing to give them the training. And then D3s are exactly that. They're doers. And oftentimes there's just a lopside when we come into clients. They either have so many doers and like no delegators or decision makers, or they have a ton of delegators on that D2 and they really don't have any of the decision makers or the doers. And so you also want to look at, you do this, like we set it up so that we have like marketing, sales, fulfillment, ops, and you actually put it into a table of who is where on that table. And you'll be really surprised to see if you run yourself through that exercise. If you're the founder, oh, this is why I'm so tired, or like, oh, this is why I'm a bottleneck, because your name
Hmm.
is everywhere on it.
Yeah. I think that's the piece. I have a one-page strategic plan that I use, and I think about that. So earlier we talked about the founder or the business owner or the executive, doesn't matter, founder, executive, but I have what I call OGSTM sort of framework. O means objective, G means goals, strategy, tactics, and measures. And what people forget is on the left side of the page is what you talk about, your D1s and your D2s. Like, really, the
Yeah.
objective division, that's really the founder. That's like a D1 level thing. the D2 level is really more the strategies. They're the ones, okay, this is where we're going as a company. I'm a functional lead in marketing, sales, finance. Like, what do we got to do in the next 36 months and quarterly chunk breakout and say, what are the things we need to do? And then when you look at the tactics, I think that's where you delegate the doer. Like, okay, who's doing it? And you assign accountability. Okay, Jane got to do this. Paul got to do this by this date. And you start granulating that. I think that I think you'll agree with this, but what I see is exactly what you talked about. A lot of D1 trying to do everything, and
Yeah.
then which is problem number one. And then problem number two, they're not taught how to systemize it and how to delegate it. I think that, can you talk about some gaps you've seen there? Because that's something I see a lot where people don't empower. Like most people, even when they're doers, don't want to be. They want to be told, okay, how can I make my greatest contribution? So if someone wants to be quote unquote a doer, that they don't necessarily want to be VPs or directors, but
Yeah.
I believe humans fundamentally want to do a good job, right? They want to like what they're doing. They want to have the life that they want. Um, so the big issue I've seen corporately and with founders is that the inability or know-how how to create a system or an approach or comfort with delegation, because that is in and of itself a superpower, I believe.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think there's two pieces to that. One is kind of what we said in the very beginning, where operations exists in every department, and people
Hmm.
very much forget that. So, like, let's say we're in marketing. Well, in marketing, you need to have the systems for marketing. They need to be documented. You need to project manage out what do you need to do for specific launches. And so, like, oftentimes when we have clients that are at that, like, multi seven figures trying to get to eight, they are usually this D1 bottleneck in marketing and sales because they haven't actually put together any of these systems, like you're saying, required to then be able to even delegate out. So I would
Yeah,
say usually in fulfillment and operations, we immediately think systems. And so we put systems in, but we forget to do that in other departments, or most D1s do. So I agree.
yeah,
I don't think there's much training going on to directors and employees specific on how to create systems, but it's also a great time to pull in the operator, right? The scaler, and say, hey, can you support me with, let's make sure that this system is here. The delegation element, I think one of the things is just, I learned about it from someone named Mark Hoverson, and it's called executive communication. And executive communication, at least what I see the most, is that we don't actually know how to communicate when it comes to delegation. And so we either give no information and we're like, hey, can you please do this thing? And that's like the level of information we give, or we give too much information, and that's when you get the excuse of like, oh, well, it took me so long to delegate it. I could have just gotten it done myself. Right.
yeah,
So there's a nice compromise where it's really just learning how to communicate as an executive, whether you're a founder or a D1 or D2, really anyone. And when I learned it, it kind of changed my life, because it was like,
yeah,
okay, what you need to do is you need to say, and there's a whole framework of, hey, let's use an example. I need a KPI report, right? I need to pull these sales reports for an affiliate commissions. So it's like, okay, not only are you going to say like, hey, my assistant, Sally, can you please pull this report? I'm going to say, hey, I need to pull this report because of XYZ. Can you
yeah.
please pull it by this time and let me know you've seen this? And it's so simple, but we never give the clarification. I was just training a team member on this actually. The like clarification of, this is what I need, this is why, this is the time I need it done by. Let me know you've seen this or if you have any questions. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's as simple as that, but we almost always forget to put deadlines or due dates or any other explanation to it.
It's so true. I don't remember who said it, and a lot of people say it, but when I think about the delegation piece, and you talk a little bit about what the context, it's almost like um, a prescription without diagnosis is malpractice. And in
Mm-hmm.
business, right, you're giving a prescription, like you're giving them something to do, but you're not telling them why, what time, how to use it. So effectively, it's malpractice, right? So there's medical malpractice, but I consider, the lack of delegation as sort of business malpractice. Because as a visionary or as a founder or an executive, you have all these things in your head and these desires and these outcomes. So I like to always think about exactly what you said, like what's the context? give them enough context, and then give them the outcome that you're looking for and the sandbox, and then empower people to go. I used to have a boss that used to change our fonts and just do sort of non-value add thing. You just sort of shake your head, right? Because you can never forecast that. And like that's not good delegation, because you go come back with something, you
Yeah.
change it all and for meaningless things. So I always feel like I love what you said, because something I really try to focus on is this: make sure I'm not doing a bad job, either not training them or motivating people or giving them the tools or structure to. At the end of the day, I do think, owners and leaders, we have a fiduciary responsibility to our people as much as we do to the P&L. I think we have it. The only way the business can survive is through people. Without people, business is just a number and some digits in a bank account somewhere. Like honestly, that's what it is. Like that's all that it is. It's imaginary. But what's real is the people. Like it's the daily conversations and the camaraderie. Like if you think about what makes a great company, it's sure it's the product, but it always comes down to people. And so delegation, I think, is how you can empower people so they can bring their A+ game every single day, right?
Definitely. I mean, especially when you're thinking around like client fulfillment, we'll say, or client success or anything like that. Like when you go into a store, let's say Target, if you go into Target and you ask for help from an employee and they're really rude and aggressive, well, you're like, well, I don't like Target anymore. I don't want to go to Target. But if you
I'm
ask
done.
someone for help and they're like, oh my gosh, yes, let me take you right there, and they're really personable, immediately you're like, I love Target. This is my favorite place. And so I do think oftentimes as founders, we forget that our team is a direct, um, what's the wording, is a direct representation of our brand.
Yeah,
Our team is
absolutely.
our brand, and we have a direct association with it. And there's a lot of examples of that in the marketplace of really big companies of, how you feel because XYZ, they're always really nice. Chick-fil-A is a perfect example. They are so intense in their training that they say
Yep.
specific things, they smile different ways, etc. Well, Chick-fil-A versus McDonald's is a very different client experience.
It is. And I actually love that brand, because they're very value driven, systematic driven. They're, I don't know how many billions of dollars. They're absolutely massive, and they only have 24 products on their their menu. Like they
Yeah.
don't have a lot. Like what
Simplicity
they do.
scales. Mm-hmm.
Simplicity scales, complexity fails, right? And what I love about, yeah, they're another great example. I had written an article on that a little while back. Maybe I'll share it with you, but it's like
Yeah.
they do so many things right, and they just take it to another level. And even there's in Florida, I got to get the name. Maybe I'll put it in the show notes, called Burgerology or something like that. But it's this burger chain. I think it's only in Florida. It's about 25 locations, but it's
Okay.
exactly what you said. It's like a sustainably oriented brand all around. Like there's vegan, there's beef, but there's like even the chairs are recycled. Like everything is, every touch point, every conversation, from the paper to the straws to the doors they use on the building, like everything is like, well, this is what a perfect brand looks like, kind of like what you said. I'll
Yeah.
send that to you, but it's just a great example of what a good brand looks like with good systems and consistency, and it's remarkable. So I'm glad you brought that up. I think one
Yeah.
of the
I mean,
pieces. Yeah,
go
go
ahead.
ahead.
I
Oh
was
no,
just
you
going
go
to
ahead.
add, I think the a piece of team that we often don't talk about is actually being able to attract team. And as you
Oh yeah.
scale, that is a huge piece. And once you get into that multi seven, eight figure place, that's actually your main bottleneck is not, you've set up the systems, it's great, but you need the right team and you have to consistently be able to. You have to recruit, replace, and repeat is basically the goal. Recruit, replace, and repeat. And so in order to do that, I have what we call the talent attraction proposition, which is basically like, yes, do you have a vision? Do you have a mission? But more than ever, especially with Gen Z being a big piece of the main job market right now, they really care about being mission and sustainable focused. And so there's a couple of studies on it. I don't have the exact data on it now, but if you are able to put, your company, how do you help the world? How do you make an impact? It
Yeah.
doesn't matter how big you are, and how do you create a work-life balance, or how do you treat your team? They 9 times out of 10, a team member will choose to work with you, a candidate, will choose to work with you, even if you pay less, because they really align with your mission, your vision, and the life that they're going to live being a part of it. And I think that we
Yep.
skip that a lot. And we can dive into systems and everything too, but you have to have systems and team. And sometimes, depending on
Certainly.
where the business is at, you're going to focus on one over the other, but eventually it's going to be team. And you have to be able to attract and retain talent.
Even the and I like ABC players. You have your A players, your B players, your C players, but even the best A players, and even if you get all that right, the best A players can be broken by bad systems. Right. So to your point, you
Hmm.
can put in a system, but if you don't put in a good system or you're not constantly in the ritual of optimizing it and leveling up, you will burn out. Like A players can be, what's the word, synergistic with the system, so they can make it 5 times more powerful than what it is. But if you have a bad system or a bad approach or inability to delegate, you will lose A players. So to your point, your inability to attract them, you might be able to attract them, but you might break them. And I think that's the other problem is, you want to repeat because you're growing and scaling. You don't want to repeat because you broke them after
Exactly.
6 months, right? And so I think that's the key. One thing I found helpful, I don't know if you use it, but what I've done with the organization is the NPS score.
Hmm.
So I did my exec MBA at the Jack Welch Institute, and it was a huge focus on NPS. And NPS is one simple score. It was developed by Bain about 25 years ago, early 2000.
Yeah.
But for those who don't know, it's basically asking the simple question of, would you recommend company XYZ to your friends and family? And if they score 9 or 10, that means you're a promoter. They talk positively, they would do great. If they're giving you a 7 or 8, they're neutral. They're like, yeah, it's good, but they're not going to like promote. If it's 6 or below, they're detractors. And so what I've done is taken that approach both to employees. So you talk about team. Would you recommend company X to your friends and family? And then why did you give us that score? I think you ask it of your suppliers because what I have found is by asking that two questions, one, what's the score and why did you give us that score? You can start getting insights to, okay, well, we put in a system, did it work? Was it a good idea?
Hmm.
And even with our customers, right? Because sometimes we can be when I was another Fortune 500, I always say, we're always out in the big, white crystal palace at head office coming up with these great marketing and sales idea, but the rubber meets the road at the retailer and where the consumer buys or where they purchase their products. And so I think if you do the NPS, ask the two simple questions: would you recommend your friends, your family, and why'd you give us that score? You ask it to your suppliers to make sure your internal processes, because you could be leaking money, they could be not giving you best terms. I've learned so much. Your consumers, and then obviously your employees. So I think it's a huge piece that just by being open-ended, you can get a ton of data. Now with ChatGPT, you can summarize that stuff in seconds, right? Get this massive data and figure out, okay, I've got 8 problems, but I can only tackle one at a time. And that's
Yeah.
what we've done, and it's been amazing. So
Yeah. Always get data. It's the best.
in God we trust, everyone else bring numbers. That's what I say. So um, we're gonna run out of time soon, so maybe we'll talk about one last topic, and then we'll schedule another one because we can go on for hours, but I'm sure other people may not. So can you talk a little bit about the labor efficiency and the ROLI, your return on labor investment? Talk a little bit about that concept, and
Yeah.
then if there's anything else, any other little tidbits, and also where people can find you and all that, so you can do that at the end. That'd be great. But if you can just focus on labor efficiency and ROLI, again, I love acronyms and models, so it's
Yeah.
one of my top 3. So thank you for
Yeah, of
sharing
course.
that.
So the ROLI, ROLI, is the return on labor investment. So same as you would look in marketing at your ROAS, your return on ad spend, we often forget to look at it in terms of team. So we know we have to hire team. We know we can't do everything ourselves, but we don't usually have an actual framework or data around, well, when do I hire? How much do I pay them? And am I actually getting an ROI or return on it? So the idea of the labor efficiency piece is that one team member should equal 250K a year in revenue minimum. Realistically, a lot depends on the industry, right? So like 250 to 400K a year is a really healthy margin. There's companies like Facebook and Apple that have gotten to 600, 800K a year. And I mean, they're just dialed in every place, right? But when you're talking about potentially a service provider or an agency, you're probably going to get closer to that 250 to like 350K a year. So that's where you're healthy. Now, most people are like, okay, but I have someone works for me part-time, or I have some, we outsource team in the Philippines. Like there's a lot of different elements to that. And so there is intricacies there where it's not just one team member equals one. We actually have it where if we have someone that's working part-time, there would be like a 0.5. Again, this is
Or rate
nothing
an
you
FTE.
yeah, like this is nothing you actually say to a team member, but same type of
Yeah,
thing. So you could figure out what your actual count is, and then you divide that by your last 12 months of annual revenue. And so that gives you your current labor efficiency and margin, your current revenue per head. You're looking at two numbers when we're talking labor efficiency. You're looking at this revenue per head that we just dove into, and then you're also looking into your labor to revenue percentage. And so that kind of goes into that idea that you mentioned at the beginning of like the more business, where I call it that because it's like the more we often have this ideology where the more money you make, the more you have to work, the more you have to hire, the more you have to spend, the more money you have to make.
yeah,
And it just creates this like cycle of like go, go, go. And we do not want to do that. And so
yeah,
you want to make sure that your labor to revenue percentage is definitely under 50%. Most people come in and it's at 45% or above. Again, this changes a little bit per industry, but realistically, you want to be closer to that 30 to maximum 40%. The lower, the better. But obviously, like we said, you want to make sure you have a happy team, happy clients, etc. So
yeah.
that's the labor efficiency and margin section. And the return on labor investment. There's a ton of the ROLI, there's a ton of calculations that go into it, but basically you want to get a 4 times return on labor investment. So
Right.
you
Yeah,
would
I know
calculate
that.
that by getting your reallocation rate, which is what is your current hourly rate. And that's not the, oh, well, we made $1 million last year, so my hourly rate is 1 million divided by blah, blah, blah. No, your actual real pay is how much did you, as the founder or the executive or whatever, get paid. And that includes any profit distributions, any discretionary income, like maybe your
Right.
car goes through the business,
Stuff
etc.
like
And
that.
then, yep, and then you divide that by how much average you worked in the last 12 months. And that gives you your actual hourly pay. And then if you want a 4 times return on labor investment, you divide that by 4, and that's how much you can feasibly afford to hire someone hourly to get a 4x ROLI. Lots
That
of
makes
math.
sense. Yeah, lots of math, and tell my daughters, the whole world's about math, right? You never escape math. Everything is
You
math.
don't.
Um,
Yep.
yeah, I just did our calc, and we're 400K per employee. So
Perfect.
that's
It's
pretty
great.
good, and we have a fair amount of systems implemented and whatnot. So that which is good. But again, I think it's a ritual and constant optimization of things. So I think it's really cool. But yeah, I totally love that because I think it's at the end of the day, you have to look at your gross margin, your net margin. What are you bringing in? Bring in the right people with the right system, and that number has gone up. Like that number will go up over time. And if you can outpace inflation, right?
Yeah.
What that means is you can pay your people better and you can put more money into the bank and retained earnings. And if you can invest more in your business, it gives you a little reserve potentially because you never know. A lot of businesses got really hurt from COVID, right? And a lot of
Yeah.
businesses exploded, but a lot of restaurants across North America really got hurt because they didn't have a reserve of cash. And restaurants are it's an admirable business, but boy, oh boy, it's a real tough
It's
business to
hard.
make it's a hard,
Yeah.
hard business. But I think if you, oftentimes, they say I think what the book, there's only 1 degree difference between boiling and not boiling. So, I'm
Mm-hmm.
Canadian, so I'll use, degrees, but even in Fahrenheit, it's 232, but water doesn't boil. I think it's 232, right?
I think it's
Um,
212, but who knows?
212. That's a
It's a
yeah, no, it's
metric
212.
conversion.
The
Okay.
metric conversion, we're all confused. Um,
Uh,
yeah, but all it takes is just 1 degree and it makes all the difference, right? So I think if we think
yeah.
about that with systems and with people, and if you just get a little bit better every day, I think having that mindset and that delegation and having mechanism to feed back and saying, keep checking your math, keep making sure we're going the right direction. It's so powerful. The one analogy that I loved was, if a pilot is off 1 degree, he or she will be off 60 miles or 100 kilometers over the course of an hour. I got a lot, right? So a little 1 degree pointing of the plane in the wrong direction makes a gargantuan difference in terms of, where they have to travel. So, our business, I think it's Donald Miller. He uses the plane analogy, right? And it's the same thing. You got to point it in the right direction and build the right systems. Otherwise, you can get, a lot of trouble. But you can get a lot of joy when you get something that goes where you want it to go, right? With your business, your dreams, your goals. So that was awesome. We didn't even get to go more deeper into the perfect workshop. We talked a lot about people things, and we'll have to do that another podcast and go real deep on that. But I really wanted to appreciate your time, your expertise, your friendship. And if you can just kind of close it up for us, let us know where people can find you. I'll also put everything you send me into the show notes, and we'll wrap on that. I'll turn it over to you for the last minute.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having me. This has been a blast. Maybe we'll officially get in person and do an in-person podcast.
Yes,
Yes, but you can follow me on Facebook. It's just Alexys Bartok. You can friend me or follow. You can do it on Instagram as well. And really the best place is just to go to processtoprofit.net. And we'll have all of the links to all of the different things. And if you do want to get the book that is specific just on the team key, you can go to theperfectorgchart.com.
perfect. And I will include those in the show notes. And thank you so much for your time and your expertise. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thanks.